"Cowboy, why do you have a rattlesnake between your legs?" shouted the Apache woman in shock. The desert sun hung low in the sky, painting the sand and rocks in a warm, golden light. The air was dry and still, with only the occasional whisper of wind moving through the tall, sparse grass. In this quiet, lonely place, the sound of hoofbeats echoed sharply. A cowboy rode slowly, his horse tired but steady, leaving a trail of dust that danced in the sunlight. He was a man of few words, with a face weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that held secrets. His clothes were dusty and worn, a leather hat pulled low over his forehead, and a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. Every movement he made suggested that he had lived many hard years, facing danger and solitude in equal measure. He had come from far away, from towns and trails that no one in this small Apache settlement had ever seen. The cowboy had heard stories of the community tucked near the edge of the desert, a place where people lived simply, relying on the land and each other. He hoped to find something there, though even he wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps safety, perhaps understanding, or perhaps a chance to rest for a while from the long, restless road he had traveled all his life. As he approached the settlement, he noticed small figures moving among the huts, watching him from a distance. Children peeked from behind the walls and elders sat outside, observing with quiet curiosity. The cowboy slowed his horse to a gentle walk, letting the animal step carefully over the rocky ground. He noticed a young Apache woman standing near the edge of the path, her dark eyes wide and full of curiosity. She wore a simple dress, handmade and practical, and her hair was tied back neatly. She looked at the cowboy with a mixture of caution and bold interest. Most people in the settlement had never seen someone like him, a stranger from another world, carrying the weight of stories in his silence. There was something about the way he moved, calm yet alert, that made her heart beat a little faster. She wondered who he was, why he had come, and whether he could be trusted. The cowboy dismounted slowly, patting his horse gently. The animal whinnied softly, sensing the unusual energy around them. The young woman stepped forward, holding her ground despite her nervousness. "You are far from home," she said softly, her voice steady despite the surprise of seeing a stranger. The cowboy looked at her for a moment, assessing her expression. Then he nodded once, a slight, quiet gesture, and replied in a low, steady voice, "I am looking for a place to rest for a while." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her sense he had seen more of the world than anyone here could imagine. The elders watched silently, curious about the stranger's intentions. Some frowned, suspicious of the cowboy's presence. Others were simply cautious, waiting to see how he would behave among them. The young woman sensed their tension and decided to act as a bridge between him and the community. She introduced herself, and the cowboy returned her greeting with a nod. He did not speak more than necessary, but his calm presence had a strange effect on those around him. He did not rush, he did not boast, and he did not show fear, even as everyone's eyes followed him with silent scrutiny. Over the next few days, the cowboy began helping with the daily tasks of the settlement. He carried water from the nearby river, helped repair fences, and assisted in preparing food. He worked with a quiet efficiency that impressed the villagers, who were not used to such a skilled, self-reliant stranger. Despite his rough exterior, he showed respect for the people and the land. He did not take more than he needed, and he seemed to understand the balance of life in the desert in a way that few outsiders could. The young woman often observed him from a distance, noticing the careful way he handled tools, the gentle way he spoke to children, and the patience he showed with animals. There was something unusual about him, something that set him apart from anyone she had ever met. One morning, as the sun rose and the desert cooled slightly, the cowboy wandered to the outskirts of the settlement. There, near the rocks and sparse bushes, he noticed movement in the sand. A rattlesnake had appeared, coiled and ready to strike. Most people would have turned away in fear, but the cowboy did not. He studied the snake calmly, understanding its behavior. He knew how dangerous it could be, but he also knew that panic was worse than caution. Slowly, carefully, he moved closer, his eyes fixed on the snake. The young woman watched from a safe distance, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and awe. She had never seen anyone approach a rattlesnake like that. With steady hands, the cowboy captured the snake, holding it with a careful but firm grip. He did not squeeze it too tightly, but he ensured it could not harm him. The rattlesnake rattled its tail in warning, a sharp, frightening sound, but he remained calm. The young woman's eyes widened and she could not help but step back, her voice caught in her throat. She had seen snakes before, but never someone handle one with such confidence. The elders, who had followed her quietly, began to murmur among themselves. Some were amazed, some fearful, and some curious. They had never seen a stranger behave in such a fearless and controlled manner. That evening, the cowboy returned to the settlement, carrying the snake carefully. He showed it to the young woman, explaining in a few quiet words how to handle it safely. She listened intently, realizing that his courage was not recklessness, but knowledge earned through experience. She began to understand that this man had survived many challenges in life, learning to respect danger rather than fear it blindly. The people of the settlement slowly began to see him in a new light, not as a threat, but as someone extraordinary, someone who had skills that could help them survive in the harsh desert environment. Days passed, and the cowboy's presence became more accepted. He shared stories of the trails he had traveled, the deserts he had crossed, and the lessons he had learned from both people and nature. Though he did not speak often, when he did, his words carried wisdom. The young woman listened closely, fascinated by the tales and the calm way he described even the most dangerous experiences. She began to trust him, sensing that his intentions were honorable. She realized that courage and knowledge often came together, and that this stranger, despite his mysterious past, could become a friend and teacher for the community. The cowboy stayed on the edge of the settlement, always alert but never imposing. He walked among the people without arrogance, helping where needed, teaching when asked, and earning respect without demanding it. His actions spoke louder than words. He handled every challenge with patience and care, showing that true bravery was not about recklessness, but understanding and preparation. The young woman admired this about him. She had learned that fear could be transformed into knowledge, that danger could be met with calm confidence, and that even a stranger could leave a lasting impact on a community. By the end of the first part of his stay, the cowboy had become a quiet legend in the settlement. The children whispered about his skills with snakes, the elders debated his mysterious past, and the young woman felt a deep respect for him that grew every day. She realized that the desert had brought them together for a reason. This man, who had arrived alone and wary, had begun to weave himself into the fabric of their lives through courage, wisdom, and calm determination. The story of the cowboy and his unusual bravery was only beginning, but already it had changed the way the people saw danger, trust, and the strength that comes from understanding the world around them. The desert was alive with the quiet hum of life, though to an outsider it might have seemed empty and still. The cowboy had become a familiar figure at the settlement now. Each morning, he rose with the sun, stretching his tired limbs and preparing for the day's work. His horse waited patiently outside the small hut where he stayed, watching him with quiet intelligence. The young Apache woman often followed him at a distance, observing his careful movements, the way he respected every living creature, and the way he treated the land as if it were something sacred. She could not help but feel both admiration and a little fear of him. There was something about his calm confidence that made it impossible to look away. One morning, after a night of restless sleep due to a distant sandstorm, the cowboy decided to explore the rocky terrain beyond the settlement. He was always searching, not for anything specific, but for knowledge and understanding of the desert that had become both his home and his teacher. The young woman watched as he prepared his gear, his leather gloves, a sturdy rope, and a small satchel of water. He moved with the quiet precision of a man who had faced countless dangers and survived them all. There was a purpose in every action, a thought behind every step. She could see that he was no ordinary traveler. He was a man shaped by the desert itself, hardened by experience but softened by wisdom. As he walked toward the rocks, the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the sand and casting long shadows. The cowboy's eyes scanned the ground carefully. He noticed the movement of small lizards, the tracks of rabbits, and the occasional scurry of a desert fox. Then, a sudden flicker of movement caught his attention. A rattlesnake, coiled and alert, its tail rattling a sharp warning. Most people would have stopped in fear, frozen by the danger, but the cowboy did not. He studied the snake's posture, the tension in its body, and the way it observed him. He knew its temperament, its warning signs, and the precise way to handle it. The young woman, watching from behind a rock, gasped softly. She had seen snakes before, but she had never witnessed anyone approach one with such calm confidence. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her wanted to run, to hide from what she thought would be a deadly encounter. But another part of her was drawn to the scene, mesmerized by the cowboy's courage and skill. She had never realized that fear could be met with knowledge and patience, and the realization left her both awed and uneasy. The cowboy moved slowly, carefully, closing the distance between himself and the rattlesnake. His hands were steady, his mind focused entirely on the creature in front of him. He understood the fine line between life and danger, and he respected it deeply. With a swift but gentle motion, he secured the snake in his hands, making sure it could not strike while causing it no harm. The snake rattled its tail violently, a warning sound that made the young woman flinch. She could not imagine holding such a creature so fearlessly. Yet the cowboy remained calm, his expression neutral, showing neither fear nor pride. It was as if he was communicating with the snake in a silent, unspoken language. When he returned to the settlement, the young woman was waiting. Her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and fascination. You caught it with your hands?" she asked, barely able to form the words. The cowboy nodded quietly, placing the snake carefully on a flat piece of cloth so it could be observed safely. He explained in calm and simple words that the snake was dangerous but not evil, that it only attacked when threatened. He showed her how to approach it, how to move slowly, and how to respect its space. She listened intently, her initial fear slowly giving way to curiosity and understanding. The elders of the settlement had gathered as well, murmuring among themselves. Some were impressed by the cowboy's knowledge and bravery, while others were wary, unsure of what to make of this man who seemed almost fearless in the face of danger. They watched closely as he handled the rattlesnake, demonstrating careful techniques that none of them had ever learned. Children gathered at a safe distance, whispering excitedly, their eyes shining with awe. The young woman noticed the way the cowboy treated everyone with respect, never showing off or seeking approval. His actions spoke louder than words, and slowly the community began to see him as someone extraordinary, someone who could teach them to live safely in a harsh and dangerous world. Over the next several days, the cowboy continued to explore the land around the settlement. He found more snakes, scorpions, and other creatures that people feared. Each time, he demonstrated how to approach them safely, showing the villagers that knowledge and patience could overcome fear. The young woman often accompanied him, learning from every movement and word. She was amazed at his ability to stay calm, even in the most dangerous situations. She realized that his courage was not recklessness but understanding, an understanding that came from years of experience and a deep respect for nature. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and pink. The cowboy found a particularly large rattlesnake coiled near a cluster of rocks. He approached it carefully, noting its alertness and readiness to strike. The young woman watched from behind a boulder, her heart pounding. She could feel the tension in the air, the quiet anticipation of what was about to happen. With careful hands, the cowboy secured the snake, holding it in a way that kept it calm and prevented it from causing harm. She could see the respect he had for the creature, a respect that was mutual in the snake's cautious movements. When he returned to the settlement that evening, the news of his encounter had already spread. The elders gathered to hear his explanation, and the children listened with rapt attention. He spoke about the importance of understanding and respecting all living things, about how fear could be turned into knowledge, and how danger could be managed with patience and care. The young woman listened closely, feeling a mixture of admiration and deep respect for the man who had taught her so much in so little time. She realized that bravery was not about showing strength but about knowing when to act and when to wait, when to respect life and when to protect it. As days turned into weeks, the cowboy became a teacher in the settlement, though he never sought the title. The young woman learned not only about snakes but also about survival, patience, and courage. She saw how he interacted with others, always calm, always careful, and always thoughtful. The community began to trust him, even as they continued to marvel at his abilities. He was no longer just a stranger. He was becoming a part of their lives, a presence that brought both excitement and a sense of safety. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert, the cowboy prepared for a demonstration for the entire settlement. He had captured several rattlesnakes safely, and he wanted to show the people how to handle them if ever needed. The young woman felt nervous, knowing that this moment would be unforgettable. As he began the demonstration, his movements were precise and careful. The snake rattled its tail, but he did not flinch. He showed everyone how to hold it, how to move it, and how to remain calm. The young woman's eyes followed every motion, her heart pounding in her chest. She could not help but admire his skill, his courage, and his calmness. Then, in a moment that would be remembered forever in the settlement, he held one rattlesnake in a way that shocked everyone. The young woman gasped and shouted, "Cowboy, why do you have a rattlesnake between your legs?" The words hung in the air, a mixture of fear, astonishment, and disbelief. The elders froze, the children gasped, and even the wind seemed to pause. The cowboy remained calm, holding the snake carefully, showing that he could manage the danger without harm. The moment was both terrifying and fascinating, leaving a deep impression on everyone who witnessed it. Afterwards, the young woman approached him, her fear giving way to curiosity and understanding. He explained quietly, showing that he never intended to scare anyone, but rather to demonstrate the importance of respect, caution, and knowledge. She realized that what had shocked her initially was a lesson in bravery and wisdom. She began to understand the depth of his experience and the value of his teachings. The community slowly absorbed the lesson as well, seeing the cowboy not as a threat but as a guide, someone who could teach them to live in harmony with the dangers around them. The days that followed were filled with learning and cautious exploration. The young woman practiced under his guidance, learning to handle snakes safely and understanding their behavior. The elders observed, impressed by the patience and care with which he taught. The children watched eagerly, fascinated by the courage and knowledge displayed before them. Through it all, the cowboy remained humble, never boasting, always teaching through action rather than words. His presence transformed the settlement, bringing a new understanding of courage, patience, and respect for life. By the end of this period, the young woman had learned more than she could have imagined. She saw the desert not as a place of fear, but as a place of lessons, where knowledge and courage could transform danger into understanding. She realized that the cowboy, though mysterious and different, had given them something far greater than fear. He had given them knowledge, respect, and the understanding that bravery comes from patience and wisdom, not recklessness or force. The sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the desert settlement. It was a quiet day, the kind where the wind barely stirred and the heat pressed gently against the skin. The cowboy had spent the morning preparing for a demonstration that the villagers had requested. Word had spread quickly of his skill in handling snakes, and while many were fascinated, some were still fearful. They wanted to see for themselves the calm control he had shown over dangerous creatures, and today he would show them. The young Apache woman stood nearby, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had seen him handle snakes before, but today felt different. There was an energy in the air that suggested something extraordinary was about to happen. The settlement gathered in the open space near the center of the huts. Children sat cross-legged on the sand, their eyes wide with anticipation. Elders leaned on their walking sticks, murmuring quietly among themselves. Some looked concerned, unsure if the demonstration was wise. The young woman stayed close to the edge, her hands clenching the edges of her dress. She could feel the tension in the air, as if even the desert itself was waiting for what was about to unfold. The cowboy approached, carrying a rattlesnake with careful hands. The snake rattled its tail, producing a sharp, warning sound that made many in the settlement flinch. Yet the cowboy's face remained calm, his expression neutral, showing no fear or concern. He placed the snake carefully on a flat piece of cloth in the center of the gathering. The crowd leaned in slightly, watching every movement. The cowboy spoke softly, explaining that the snake would not attack unless provoked, that it had a natural instinct to defend itself, and that understanding this instinct was the key to safety. The young woman listened intently, nodding along with every word. She could feel her fear mingling with awe. The children whispered to one another, fascinated by the sharp rattle and the strange courage of the cowboy. Some of the elders shifted uneasily, unsure whether to trust this demonstration, but they were curious enough to watch. The cowboy then picked up another rattlesnake, larger and more alert than the first. The snake's tail rattled violently, a sound that echoed through the quiet settlement. The young woman held her breath, her eyes fixed on the cowboy's careful movements. She had watched him before, but the intensity of this moment was unlike anything she had seen. The way he moved was precise and calculated. His hands never wavered, even as the snake coiled and rattled. He spoke softly to it, his voice low and steady, almost like a whisper meant only for the creature. The villagers watched in stunned silence. They had never seen such control, such calmness, and such understanding in the face of danger. Then came the moment that would be remembered for years. The cowboy, in a calculated but daring move, positioned the rattlesnake in a way that shocked everyone. The snake was held with careful precision between his legs, a position that was both risky and mesmerizing. The young woman gasped, stepping back instinctively. Her voice rang out across the gathering. "Cowboy, why do you have a rattlesnake between your legs?" The words were a mixture of fear, astonishment, and disbelief. Every head turned toward the cowboy, eyes wide, mouths open, some in awe, some in fear. Even the children froze, unsure whether to scream or simply stare. The elders exchanged worried glances, unsure if this act was safe. The cowboy remained completely calm, holding the snake without a hint of fear. His movements were gentle but firm, ensuring the snake could not strike while also causing it no harm. The rattling continued, sharp and loud, but he ignored it, his focus absolute. He understood the delicate balance between control and respect, between courage and recklessness. The young woman's heart raced. She had never seen such fearlessness combined with such careful understanding. She realized in that instant that his bravery was not born from recklessness, but from experience, knowledge, and a deep respect for life. The crowd began to murmur softly. Some were impressed, Some were frightened and some were entirely captivated. They could see that the cowboy was not showing off or seeking attention. He was teaching, demonstrating, and sharing knowledge in the only way he knew how, through action. The young woman stepped closer, her curiosity overpowering her fear. She could see the calm in his eyes, the way he handled the snake with complete respect. She realized that the moment that had shocked her at first was actually a lesson in courage, patience, and understanding. She could feel the tension in the air shift, the fear in the villagers beginning to change into respect. After a few long moments, the cowboy carefully set the rattlesnake down on the cloth. The creature coiled quietly, still alert but unharmed. The young woman let out a slow breath she had been holding, relief washing over her. She realized that she had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a daring act, but a demonstration of how knowledge and courage could transform fear into understanding. The elders nodded slowly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others smiled, recognizing the value of the lesson. The children clapped softly, excited and inspired by the bravery they had witnessed. The cowboy spoke again, his voice calm and steady. He explained that fear was natural, but it could be managed with knowledge and careful observation. He reminded the villagers that every creature had its place in the world, and that respecting that place was essential for survival. The young woman listened carefully, absorbing every word. She felt a new sense of understanding, a realization that bravery was not simply about facing danger. It was about knowing it, respecting it, and acting with patience and care. She understood now why the cowboy had come to their settlement, not to prove himself but to share knowledge, to teach courage, and to show respect for life. The days following the demonstration were filled with learning and practice. The young woman spent hours with the cowboy, watching him handle snakes, learning to identify dangerous creatures, and understanding the careful balance between fear and respect. She practiced under his guidance, slowly gaining confidence in her ability to approach and understand the animals that had once terrified her. The children watched, eager to learn, while the elders offered advice and stories of their own experiences. The settlement became a place of cautious exploration and discovery, where fear was gradually replaced by knowledge and respect. The cowboy's presence began to change the way the settlement viewed the world around them. They saw the desert not as a place of fear, but as a teacher, where careful observation and understanding could transform danger into opportunity. The young woman felt a deep connection to him, not because of romance, but because of the lessons he imparted and the courage he inspired. She admired his humility, his patience, and his respect for life. She realized that the lessons he taught would remain with her long after he had gone. One afternoon, a small group of villagers approached the cowboy, asking to learn more about handling snakes safely. He agreed, demonstrating careful techniques with smaller rattlesnakes while explaining the signs to watch for, the behaviors to understand, and the way to remain calm. The young woman observed, noticing the transformation in the people around her. They were no longer fearful but curious and attentive. She realized that the cowboy's teachings went beyond survival. They were lessons in courage, understanding, and respect. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the desert, the young woman reflected on the events of the day. She thought about the shocking moment when she had shouted at the cowboy, the fear she had felt, and the lesson she had learned. She understood now that bravery was about more than facing danger. It was about knowledge, respect, and careful action. The cowboy had shown her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it. That night, as the settlement quieted and the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, the young woman sat outside her hut, thinking about the cowboy. She realized that his presence had changed more than her understanding of snakes. It had changed the way she viewed fear, courage, and respect. She knew that the lessons he had taught would stay with her forever. The cowboy, sitting nearby, watched the stars in silence, his thoughts his own. He did not need praise or recognition. The knowledge he had shared and the respect he had earned were reward enough. By the end of part 3, the settlement had a new perspective. Fear had transformed into understanding. Danger had become an opportunity to learn. And the cowboy, the quiet stranger who had arrived months before, had become a figure of respect and admiration. The young woman realized that the shocking moment with the rattlesnake had not just been a test of courage. It had been a turning point, a lesson in life itself. She felt gratitude and awe for the man who had shown her the true meaning of bravery, patience, and respect for all living things. The days after the rattlesnake demonstration were filled with a new energy in the settlement. The young Apache woman noticed the change immediately. People moved with more confidence. Children played freely near the edges of the desert without the fear of snakes or scorpions looming over them. Even the elders, who had once been cautious and suspicious of the cowboy, began to approach him with questions and curiosity. They wanted to learn, to understand the world beyond their immediate experience, and the cowboy had become a guide, a teacher in a way that no one had expected. The young woman spent much of her time observing him. She noticed the patience in every movement he made. He never rushed, never scolded, never acted out of anger or pride. Whether handling a dangerous rattlesnake or teaching a child how to identify tracks in the sand, he showed care, respect, and calm understanding. She began to understand why the villagers were slowly opening their hearts to him. His presence was not just about courage. It was about teaching the community to see fear in a new way, something to respect and understand, not something to run from. One morning, the cowboy suggested a small journey to the nearby desert hills. He wanted to teach the villagers how to find safe water, identify edible plants, and move quietly to avoid snakes and other dangers. The elders were hesitant at first, concerned about the risk, but the young woman encouraged them to go. She had learned much from the cowboy already, and she trusted him. As the group began their journey, she walked beside him, noticing the way he read the land, the way he watched for signs of movement in the sand, and the way he paused to examine every small detail of the desert. It was as if he could communicate with the land itself, understanding its secrets and dangers. During the trek, the cowboy paused near a cluster of rocks and crouched down. He pointed to a series of small marks in the sand. "These are rattlesnake tracks," he explained. "See how they move, see how the sand is disturbed. Knowing this can save your life." The villagers leaned in, studying the tracks carefully. The young woman could feel a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She realized that what had once seemed dangerous and terrifying could now be understood and respected. The cowboy showed them how to approach these areas safely, how to watch for warning signs, and how to maintain calm when faced with potential danger. As the group continued, the cowboy found a small bush with green leaves growing in the rocky soil. "This is safe to eat," he said, breaking off a few leaves and showing them to the villagers. "It may not taste like much, but it will keep you alive when there is nothing else." The young woman tasted the leaves cautiously, surprised by the simple nourishment they provided. She began to see the desert in a new light, not just as a place of danger, but as a place full of lessons, where every plant, animal, and rock could teach something important if observed carefully. The day continued with more lessons. The cowboy taught them how to recognize different animal tracks, how to listen for subtle sounds in the wind, and how to move quietly to avoid attracting attention from dangerous creatures. The villagers were fascinated. They asked questions, repeated the exercises, and even began practicing in small groups under the cowboy's careful guidance. The young woman noticed how the children grew braver with each step, how the elders became more confident in their movements, and how the community's fear slowly transformed into knowledge. She felt proud and grateful to be part of this learning, realizing that the cowboy had changed more than just her understanding of the desert. He had changed the entire settlement's relationship with the land. As they returned to the settlement in the late afternoon, the sun casting long golden shadows across the sand, the young woman reflected on the lessons of the day. She realized that the cowboy's courage and knowledge were inseparable. His bravery did not come from recklessness or a desire to impress. It came from understanding, preparation, and respect for life. She understood that the rattlesnake incident, which had shocked her and the community, was just one example of his philosophy. Fear could be transformed into understanding through knowledge and careful action. In the days that followed, the cowboy continued to teach in small ways. He helped repair fences, guided children in safe play, and showed the villagers how to gather resources without disturbing the natural balance. The young woman noticed how the elders, once wary and skeptical, now approached him with questions and respect. They sought his advice on everyday problems, realizing that his experience and calm demeanor could be valuable in more ways than just survival skills. The cowboy never demanded respect or recognition, yet the villagers gave it willingly, drawn to his quiet strength and wisdom. One afternoon, a young boy had a minor encounter with a small rattlesnake while exploring near the settlement. He froze in fear, unable to move. The young woman, remembering the cowboy's teachings, ran to him and guided him through the steps he had learned, staying calm, observing the snake and moving slowly to safety. Soon after, the cowboy arrived, observing silently but approvingly. He nodded, showing the young woman that she had internalized the lessons he had been teaching. She felt a surge of pride and realization. She was beginning to understand not only the desert and its dangers, but also the responsibility that came with knowledge. As the community grew more confident, the young woman found herself learning even deeper lessons from the cowboy. He spoke little of his past, but when he did, his stories revealed a life shaped by challenges, loss, and survival. He had traveled through harsh lands, faced danger at every turn, and learned to respect the strength and fragility of life. Each story carried a lesson, often quiet and subtle, about patience, observation, and humility. The young woman listened, absorbing every word, realizing that courage was not a single heroic act but a way of living, a steady presence in both calm and danger. The bond between the cowboy and the young woman grew quietly over time. It was a bond of trust, respect, and shared understanding. She admired his wisdom, and he recognized her curiosity, intelligence, and bravery. They did not need words to understand each other. Their shared experiences and observations created a connection that was deep and meaningful. She began to see the world as he did, noticing details that others overlooked, understanding the subtle signs of life and danger in the desert, and appreciating the delicate balance that sustained all living things. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in fiery shades of red and orange, the young woman approached the cowboy. "You have taught us so much," she said softly. "I never thought I could feel safe in the desert or even understand it the way you do." He nodded, his expression calm and thoughtful. "Safety and understanding come from respect," he replied simply. "The desert is not our enemy, it is a teacher. If we watch, listen, and learn, it can guide us." The young woman smiled, realizing that his lessons extended far beyond survival. They were lessons in life itself. The settlement began to change in more subtle ways. People moved with purpose, children explored with curiosity instead of fear, and the elders shared the lessons they had learned with others. The cowboy's influence spread quietly but powerfully. The young woman noticed that the community was not just learning about snakes or the desert. They were learning to trust themselves, to act with patience, and to respect the natural world around them. She understood that the cowboy had given them a gift far greater than any material help. He had given them knowledge, courage, and wisdom. As weeks passed, The young woman found herself reflecting often on the cowboy's presence. She thought about the first moment she had shouted at him, shocked by the rattlesnake. She remembered the fear, the astonishment, and the awe. Now she understood the lesson behind that moment. Courage was not about bravado or showing off. It was about understanding, preparation, and respect. The cowboy had not only shown them how to survive in the desert, he had shown them how to live with awareness and courage, transforming fear into knowledge and respect. The cowboy's teachings became a quiet part of the settlement's daily life. He no longer needed to demonstrate with snakes or explain survival techniques constantly. The young woman, children, and elders had internalized his lessons. They moved with confidence, observed with care, and approached challenges with patience. The young woman felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect. She realized that the cowboy had changed her in ways she could not yet fully describe. He had taught her to see, to observe, and to act with courage and understanding, and in doing so, he had changed the settlement forever. By the end of Part 4, the young woman and the community had grown in understanding, trust, and courage. The cowboy, though still mysterious and quiet, had become a mentor, a teacher, and a presence that inspired respect and admiration. Fear had been replaced with knowledge, hesitation with confidence, and danger with awareness. The settlement had transformed, and the young woman understood that the lessons they had learned would remain with them for a lifetime. The cowboy had shown them that courage was not about reckless acts, but about understanding, respect, and careful, thoughtful action. The desert morning was calm, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and orange as the sun slowly rose above the horizon. A gentle breeze moved through the settlement, carrying the warm scent of sand and desert flowers. The cowboy stood outside the small hut where he had stayed for weeks, looking at the horizon with a quiet, thoughtful expression. His horse, faithful and patient, shifted its weight on the sand, waiting as always. Today would be different. The cowboy had decided it was time to leave the settlement, to continue his journey across the vast desert he had known for so long. The young Apache woman approached him, her heart heavy but filled with gratitude. She had grown close to the cowboy over the weeks, learning from him, observing him, and admiring his patience, courage, and wisdom. She had seen him face danger calmly, teach lessons without arrogance, and inspire confidence in the entire community. "You are leaving?" she asked softly, trying to hide the sadness in her voice. The cowboy turned to her and nodded. "Yes," he said quietly, "the desert calls me. I cannot stay in one place for too long, but I will leave something behind if they are willing to keep it." The young woman nodded, understanding more than words could express. She realized that the lessons he had taught were far more important than his presence. The knowledge of handling danger, the understanding of the desert, and the courage to face fear were gifts he had given them, and they would last far beyond his departure. She thought of the rattlesnake, the moment that had first shocked her, and the way the community had learned to transform fear into respect and understanding. That lesson had stayed with her and would remain a story told for generations. The villagers gathered near the central area, sensing that the cowboy's departure was near. Children whispered among themselves, excited and sad at the same time, while the elders stood quietly, reflecting on the changes the cowboy had brought to their community. He had arrived as a stranger, mysterious and silent, and now he was leaving as a respected teacher, someone who had shown them a new way of understanding the world around them. The young woman noticed the expressions on their faces: pride, admiration, gratitude, and a touch of sadness. The cowboy had become more than a visitor. He had become part of their lives, a presence that would be remembered long after he was gone. Before leaving, the cowboy walked slowly among the villagers, observing the ways they had applied his teachings. Children practiced identifying tracks in the sand, elders carefully examined plants, and the young woman moved confidently as she demonstrated how to handle small, non-dangerous snakes safely. He watched with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the knowledge he had shared was taking root. He had not needed to demand respect or recognition. He had earned it through action, patience, and care. The community had grown stronger, braver, and more understanding because of his presence. The young woman approached him once more as he prepared his horse. "Will you ever return?" she asked, her voice full of hope. The cowboy looked at her, his eyes calm but thoughtful. "Perhaps," he replied, "but even if I do not, the lessons remain. The desert teaches us and you have learned to listen. That is the most important thing." She nodded, understanding the depth of his words. It was not the cowboy himself who was most important, but the courage, wisdom, and respect for life that he had instilled in them. As he mounted his horse, the young woman and the villagers watched silently. The cowboy's movements were precise, careful, and calm, just as they had always been. The rattlesnake that had once shocked the young woman had become a symbol of his teachings, of courage, patience, and understanding. The horse stepped forward, kicking up small clouds of sand, and the cowboy began his journey across the desert. The young woman felt a mixture of pride, sadness, and deep gratitude. She knew that she and the community had been changed forever by his presence. The journey of the cowboy took him across wide plains, rocky hills, and stretches of desert that seemed endless. As he rode, he reflected on the weeks he had spent in the settlement. He thought of the young woman, the children, the elders, and the lessons he had shared. He realized that his time with them had been meaningful not because of danger or daring, but because of connection, respect, and understanding. He had left them stronger, wiser, and more confident than they had been when he arrived. And that was all he had ever hoped to do. Back in the settlement, life continued, but with a new sense of awareness and understanding. The young woman often thought of the cowboy, remembering his calm movements, his quiet teachings, and the way he had transformed fear into knowledge. She reflected on the first time she had shouted at him, shocked by the rattlesnake. That moment, once terrifying, had become a turning point. It had taught her and the community to face danger with respect and careful observation rather than panic. It had shown them that courage was not recklessness, but understanding and preparedness. The children practiced under her guidance now, learning the lessons the cowboy had taught. They explored the desert with confidence, identifying tracks, observing plants, and approaching dangerous creatures with caution. The elders, once skeptical, now shared stories of their experiences with new respect for the lessons they had learned. The young woman realized that the cowboy's influence had become woven into the fabric of the community. His teachings were not just memories, they were practical skills and wisdom that could be applied daily, transforming how the settlement lived and interacted with the desert. In quiet moments, the young woman would sit near the edge of the settlement, watching the horizon where the cowboy had disappeared. She thought about the lessons he had shared about respect, patience, and courage. She realized that his teachings went beyond survival. They were lessons in life itself. The way he approached danger, the way he treated every living creature with care, and the way he acted with calm confidence were all lessons she could carry with her forever. She felt a sense of gratitude that words could hardly express. The settlement, too, reflected his presence in subtle ways. Fear no longer dominated their interactions with the desert. Curiosity and observation replaced hesitation and panic. They moved with purpose, respected life in all its forms, and acted with knowledge rather than instinct alone. The cowboy had shown them that understanding could transform fear, and respect could transform danger into a source of learning. Even though he was gone, his lessons remained alive in the way they lived, and in the stories they would tell for generations. One evening, as the desert sky turned deep blue and stars began to appear, the young woman sat outside, reflecting on the cowboy's impact. She thought about the rattlesnake, the moments of fear, and the lessons that had followed. She realized that the cowboy had given them more than survival skills. He had given them courage, wisdom, and a new way of seeing the world. His presence had been quiet but powerful, and his departure, though bittersweet, had left a lasting mark on the community. The young woman understood that some lessons could not be taught with words alone. They had to be experienced, observed, and absorbed through action. The cowboy had provided those experiences, showing by example how to approach life with calm confidence, respect for danger, and careful attention. She knew that she would carry these lessons with her always, teaching others as he had taught her. The settlement had changed, and she had grown stronger and wiser because of him. As the night deepened, the young woman finally stood and walked back toward the huts, feeling a sense of peace. The cowboy had left, but he had also left something much more important, a legacy of courage, knowledge, and respect that would endure. The rattlesnake incident, once shocking and frightening, had become a symbol of transformation. Fear had been replaced with understanding, danger with respect, and hesitation with confidence. She smiled softly, knowing that the lessons of the cowboy would live on in the hearts and minds of the settlement for generations to come. And so, the cowboy rode on across the desert, disappearing into the horizon as the settlement thrived in the knowledge, courage, and wisdom he had shared. The young woman, the children, and the elders carried his teachings forward, honoring his quiet strength and the lessons that had changed their lives forever. Though he was gone, the memory of his presence remained, a guiding light in the endless desert, reminding them always that true courage comes not from fearlessness, but from understanding, respect, and the willingness to face life with patience and care.